At what should have been a proud moment for my family's legacy, my daughter-in-law publicly shamed me, telling me to clean bathrooms instead of contributing. My son stood by silently, but I just smiled. They thought I was broken, a relic. They had no idea the fire they just ignited. You won't believe what happened next. Follow my story, like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. Eleanor felt the chill of the boardroom settle deep in her bones, a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This very room, a place of power and meticulous strategy for decades, where she and her late husband, Arthur, had built Reynolds Industries from a modest enterprise into an international powerhouse, now felt like a stage set for her humiliation. At 66, a widow whose life had been inextricably linked to the pulse of this company, she was relegated to a silent corner seat. An unwelcome observer, the polished mahogany table, the plush leather chairs, even the faint scent of Arthur's favorite cigar smoke that she sometimes imagined lingered in the air, all seemed to mock her diminished presence. Her gaze was fixed on her son, Daniel, whose face was beaded with perspiration despite the cool temperature. He fumbled through a presentation to a panel of investors, his voice wavering as he struggled to articulate the projected growth of Reynolds Industries. The weight of his father's legacy, and perhaps his mother's formidable shadow, seemed to press down on him. Eleanor watched, her heart aching with a mixture of sympathy and frustration, wishing she could step in, clarify a point, offer a statistic she knew by heart. Across the table from Daniel, his wife, Victoria, sat with an almost unnerving composure. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped a silent, impatient rhythm on the tabletop, a counterpoint to Daniel's visible distress. Victoria exuded an air of sleek, modern confidence that Eleanor found both impressive and deeply unsettling. Her sharp, calculating eyes missed nothing, and her presence in these meetings, though not new, always made Eleanor feel a distinct unease. The investors, particularly Mr. Davies, a man whose stern reputation preceded him, and Miss Lee, with her astute, piercing questions, began to probe. Their queries were sharp, precise, targeting the soft underbelly of Daniel's presentation. They spoke of emerging markets with volatile political climates and regulatory challenges that could derail the most promising ventures. Daniel stammered, his answers growing increasingly vague, his well-rehearsed lines dissolving under pressure. He visibly deflated, his eyes darting around the room, desperately seeking an anchor. Then, his gaze landed on Eleanor. A flicker of hope, or perhaps desperation, crossed his face. "Mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you could explain the regulatory framework we dealt with in the Middle Eastern markets? You were instrumental in securing those initial contracts." Eleanor felt a surge of adrenaline, a familiar readiness. This was her territory, the very ground she and Arthur had conquered. But before she could even open her mouth, Victoria moved. She stood abruptly, her crisp business suit rustling, cutting a sharp silhouette against the boardroom's large window. Her voice, usually modulated, now carried an edge of steel. "Eleanor," she interjected, her tone deceptively calm but unmistakably dismissive. "This is a professional meeting. We don't need you here confusing everyone with outdated information." The words hung in the air, a physical blow. Outdated information? Eleanor had practically written the book on those markets. She felt her face flush, but Victoria wasn't finished. Her voice rose, gaining in volume and derision, leaving no room for doubt or politeness. "You want to help? Go clean the bathroom, you wrinkled old woman. Leave the real business to people who actually understand the modern world." Eleanor was stunned. The insult, raw and vicious, pierced through her like a shard of ice. She felt every wrinkle, every ache of her 66 years, suddenly laid bare and mocked. Her breath hitched. Her gaze, wide with shock, flew to Daniel. He stood frozen, his eyes wide and panicked, looking caught between his wife's brutal assault and his mother's mortification. He opened his mouth, then closed it, offering no defense, no word of protest. His silence was a betrayal, a deeper wound than Victoria's cruel words. Victoria, empowered by Daniel's inaction, continued her verbal assault, her voice dripping with contempt. Honestly, what are you even doing here, Eleanor? You're a retired widow who should be at home knitting or whatever old ladies do. This isn't your place anymore. Eleanor felt a peculiar detachment, as if watching the scene unfold from a distance. Her legs, which had carried her through countless late nights and high-stakes negotiations in this very building, suddenly felt unsteady. A tremor ran through her, but she managed to push herself up from the chair. Her voice, when it came, was thin, barely audible. I think I should go. Victoria, completely unfazed by the impact of her words or Eleanor's distress, merely offered a bright, brittle smile to the investors. My apologies, gentlemen. Miss Lee. A slight family misunderstanding. Mr. Davies, ever the diplomat, looked uncomfortable, his gaze flicking between the two women before politely suggesting, "Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting, Daniel. Once things are more settled." Eleanor walked out, the silence of her departure deafening. She passed Brenda, the longtime company secretary, whose eyes held a flicker of sympathy, quickly masked. Along the corridor walls, portraits of Arthur and her, commemorating their various milestones, the groundbreaking ceremony, the expansion into Europe, the acquisition of their biggest competitor, seemed to watch her retreat, silent witnesses to her public dismantling. Each framed achievement, a testament to her past triumphs, now felt like a cruel reminder of all she had lost. Reaching her car, Eleanor fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Once inside, the dam broke. She sobbed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from her chest, a grief she hadn't allowed herself since Arthur's funeral. It wasn't just the humiliation, though that burned fiercely. It was the crushing realization that in losing Arthur, she had also, somehow, lost herself. She had let her identity become so intertwined with his, with the company they built together, that now, without him, and stripped of her place, she felt utterly adrift. Victoria's cruel words echoed in the enclosed space of her car, each one a fresh sting. Wrinkled old woman. Outdated information. Go clean the bathroom. But beneath the tidal wave of humiliation and pain, something cold and resolute began to stir within her. It was a familiar sensation, a dormant fire that had fueled her and Arthur through every challenge, every betrayal, every uphill battle. It was the woman Eleanor used to be, the shrewd, unyielding force who wouldn't just sit by and watch her legacy be dismantled. The tears still streamed, but now, mixed with sorrow, was a burgeoning resolve. This wasn't over. The heavy oak door of her house closed behind Eleanor with a soft thud that echoed through the cavernous, empty rooms. This house, a repository of 30 years of shared life with Arthur, now felt less like a home and more like a carefully curated museum of memories. Every piece of furniture, every framed photograph, every book on the shelves, spoke of a vibrant past, a love, and a partnership that had once filled these spaces with warmth and purpose. Now, it was just her, adrift in the silence. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the antique hall mirror, its ornate frame gathering dust. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her shoulders, once held erect with confidence, now curved slightly, burdened by unseen weight. Deep worry lines etched themselves around her eyes and mouth, lines she hadn't noticed accumulating. Her silver hair, once meticulously styled, was now a little unkempt. The vibrant spark that had once defined Eleanor Reynolds seemed to have dimmed, replaced by a weary resignation. She wandered into the kitchen, the heart of their home, where Arthur had spent countless mornings tending to his beloved roses, which he grew in pots by the window. Now, they were a tangled mess of overgrown branches and faded blooms, their delicate petals browned and neglected. Eleanor stared at them, a poignant symbol of how much she had let go in the 2 years since Arthur's death. Not just the roses, not just the house, but herself. She had retreated, allowing grief to cocoon her, slowly eroding the sharp, capable woman she once was. Her eyes drifted to a stack of ignored mail on the counter, accumulating beside a half-finished cup of tea. Among them were official-looking envelopes, legal documents. Daniel had taken over managing her investments and pension, assuring her she needn't worry about such mundane matters. He'd even set up a new trust, explaining it was for her future security. At the time, she'd been grateful, too numb with grief to question anything. Now, a seed of doubt, planted by Victoria's cruel words, began to sprout. Eleanor walked slowly, almost hesitantly, towards Arthur's study, a room she had largely avoided since his passing. It was a sacred space, filled with his scent, his presence. She pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of old leather, pipe tobacco, and ink enveloped her. His worn leather armchair still held the impression of his body, as if he had just risen for a moment. His reading glasses lay precisely where he'd left them, perched atop an open book on his desk. A wave of sorrow, sharp and fresh, washed over her. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Eleanor approached the large, imposing filing cabinet Arthur kept in the corner. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, traced the labels. Middle East Ventures 1995 to 2010, one drawer read. With a decisive click, she pulled it open. Inside, meticulously organized, were thick files brimming with contracts, many in both English and looping Arabic script, financial reports, and faded photographs. She pulled out a folder marked Jordan Water Treatment Project. Tucked inside was a photograph she had completely forgotten. It showed her and Arthur standing proudly in front of a newly completed water treatment facility in a remote Jordanian village, the desert sun glinting off the metal pipes. Arthur, ever the stoic businessman, had a rare, soft smile. But it was Eleanor in the photo who captivated her. Her younger self, perhaps in her late 40s, stood tall, her hair swept back by the desert wind, her eyes shining with an almost incandescent glow of accomplishment. Her suit jacket was slightly disheveled, her hands grimy from inspecting machinery, but her face radiated a fierce pride, a vibrant energy. She remembered that day so vividly. Arthur had looked at the printed photo later, his arm around her. "You look so proud in this one," he'd said, his voice warm with admiration, like you could take on the world. She had laughed, a confident, ringing sound that felt alien to her now. "I feel like I could," she'd replied. And she had meant every word. She had been a force, an integral part of Reynolds Industries, negotiating deals, navigating complex international politics, seeing projects through from inception to completion, leafing through more documents. Letters of commendation from foreign dignitaries, detailed engineering plans with her own annotations, glowing press clippings about their company's philanthropic efforts and innovative solutions. A profound realization dawned on her. She hadn't just lost Arthur. She had, in her grief, voluntarily lost the woman she was. She had allowed herself to wither, to become the retired widow Victoria had so cruelly described. The fire wasn't just dormant, she had smothered it herself. The insistent ring of her phone startled her, pulling her abruptly from the past. It was Daniel. His voice, when she answered, was strained, laced with an exhaustion that mirrored her own. "Mom, I wanted to apologize for Victoria. She was out of line. The stress of everything, you know? It's been intense." Eleanor felt a familiar pang of maternal worry, mixed with a renewed resentment for his silence in the boardroom. "How did the meeting end, Daniel?" she asked, her voice deliberately even. He sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. "They postponed it. Mr. Davies said they wanted to review our management structure before proceeding. It was humiliating, Mom. Victoria made a complete fool of us. And you," Eleanor thought but didn't say. She waited, letting the silence hang. Daniel finally broke it, his voice cracking with a raw vulnerability she hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I don't know what I'm doing. I truly don't. The company, It's hemorrhaging money. And Victoria keeps pushing these expansion plans, these new ventures, that I just don't understand. I feel like I'm drowning. Eleanor's heart ached for him. Daniel had never wanted to run Reynolds Industries. He'd studied art history, dreaming of curating galleries, not negotiating supply chains or balancing ledgers. He was a gentle soul, thrust into a world of cutthroat business by his father's sudden death and Victoria's relentless ambition. "What plans is Victoria pushing, Daniel?" she asked, her mind already shifting, the embers of her old self beginning to glow hotter. He hesitated, then plunged in, as if confessing a terrible secret. She wants to sell the manufacturing division entirely, claims it's dead, that the future is in luxury real estate development. She wants to liquidate decades of our work, Mom, everything you and Dad built, to fund her vision. Eleanor closed her eyes, picturing the sprawling manufacturing plant, its busy floors humming with activity, the rhythmic clang of machinery a testament to steady progress. The manufacturing division wasn't just a part of Reynolds Industries, it was its very heart, the bedrock upon which she and Arthur had meticulously built everything else. It was stable, consistently profitable, and, crucially, it employed over 200 dedicated individuals, many of whom had been with them for decades. To sell it would be an act of corporate vandalism, a betrayal of their entire ethos. "Daniel," she said, her voice now firm, a hint of her old decisiveness returning. "Have you looked at the actual numbers for the manufacturing division? Its profitability? Its long-term contracts?" He hesitated, then replied, his voice laced with the uncertainty that had become his default. "Victoria handles all that, Mom. She's got her MBA from Wharton, and she says I should trust her expertise. She's convinced it's a drain, holding back our potential." Eleanor felt an internal scoff rise in her throat. Wharton MBA or not, Victoria had been with Reynolds Industries for barely 3 years. What did a degree, no matter how prestigious, truly teach about the unpredictable nuances of 15 years of hands-on experience in navigating the labyrinthine international markets? Did it teach her about cultivating relationships with reliable suppliers in remote regions, or the delicate dance of securing government promises that sometimes vanished overnight? Victoria's expertise was theoretical, not forged in the crucible of real-world challenges like hers had been. "Daniel," Eleanor said carefully, her tone softening slightly, sensing his growing desperation. "Maybe we should sit down and go through the books together. Just the two of us. I could show you how Arthur and I always approach these things." He hesitated again, a nervous cough escaping him. "Victoria wouldn't like that, Mom. She thinks you're, well, too stuck in the past. She says you don't understand modern business." Despite the bravado in his recounting of Victoria's words, Eleanor detected a palpable tremor of fear in his voice, a deep-seated unease that belied his attempts to sound confident. "Stuck in the past?" Eleanor allowed herself a small, mirthless chuckle. "Do you know, Daniel, that I learned Arabic specifically so Arthur and I could negotiate our own contracts directly in the Middle East? We didn't rely on translators or intermediaries. We understood the cultural nuances, the legal intricacies. I studied international law for 2 years before we even considered our first major overseas expansion. I even spent 3 months living in a small village in Jordan to understand local customs, the building codes, the daily lives of the people who would use our water treatment facilities." Daniel was silent on the other end, a stunned pause. "You learned Arabic?" he finally whispered, the surprise evident in his voice. "Mom, I had no idea." It was a stark reminder of how much he hadn't known, how much of her professional life she had kept separate from her role as his mother, and how, in his adult life, he had largely dismissed her as just Mom. Eleanor continued, a quiet resolve in her tone. "I also picked up enough Mandarin to manage basic conversations with our partners in Shanghai and enough Portuguese to get by in Brazil. Your father used to joke that I could negotiate anywhere in the world, blindfolded." A faint, Fond smile touched her lips at the memory of Arthur's pride in her capabilities. "There's a lot you don't know, Daniel," Eleanor stated, her voice regaining its full strength, her words precise and measured. "A lot about the company, about our international connections, about the way business truly works beyond the glossy projections and PowerPoint slides. It's not just about numbers, it's about relationships, trust, long-term vision." She pressed on, pushing past his discomfort. "What does Victoria actually know about Reynolds Industries, Daniel? She's been here, 3 years? Your father and we built this company from nothing. Over 25 hard-fought years. We poured our lives into it. We knew every bolt, every contract, every employee by name." Her voice tightened with indignation. "And now she wants to throw all of that away, our entire legacy, for some trendy real estate scheme that could collapse with the next economic hiccup?" Daniel, clearly flustered, tried to interject. "But Mom, Victoria's projections show enormous profits. She's talking about luxury developments, prime locations, a complete rebranding of the company image." Eleanor cut him off, her patience wearing thin. "And the immense risks? The existing contracts we have? What about the fate of those 200 employees whose families depend on us? Does she factor in the human cost, Daniel? Or does she just dismiss it as sentiment, as a weakness?" The word sentiment had been Victoria's, sneered in a previous conversation about employee loyalty, a conversation Eleanor had overheard by accident. Victoria saw loyalty as an anachronism, a liability. A long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Daniel's voice returned, barely audible, stripped of all pretense. "Mom," he confessed, the words a raw whisper, "I think I'm in over my head. I really do." A sharp, painful crack opened in Eleanor's chest. The guilt was immediate, overwhelming. She had stepped aside too quickly, too completely, leaving her well-meaning but ill-prepared son vulnerable to Victoria's ambition. She had allowed him to drown, but that was about to change. "Then maybe," Eleanor concluded, her voice now imbued with an unyielding resolve, the woman from the Jordanian desert photo stirring back to life. "It's time to swim back to shore." After the phone call with Daniel, Eleanor didn't move for a long time. She remained in Arthur's worn leather chair, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their shared legacy. The meticulously organized files, the faded photographs, the thick, heavy contracts in their diverse languages. The grief and self-pity that had clouded her mind for 2 years began to recede, replaced by a clarity and purpose she hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. The sting of Victoria's words, and Daniel's helpless plea, had acted like a brutal but necessary shock to her system. She looked around the study, no longer seeing ghosts, but foundations. "I wasn't stuck in the past," she declared aloud to the empty room, her voice firm, resonant with rediscovered strength. "I was the past, present, and future of Reynolds Industries, all rolled into one." And tomorrow, she promised herself, her eyes glinting with a steely determination, I was going to start proving it. The evening passed in a whirlwind of activity she hadn't experienced in years. Eleanor systematically went through Arthur's old leather-bound address books and contact lists, a repository of global connections. She refreshed her memory on key players, market trends, and regional specificities. She spoke aloud, practicing her Arabic, letting the unfamiliar yet once fluent sounds roll off her tongue. Each phrase a memory of a negotiation, a conversation, a shared meal with partners halfway across the world. The language felt a little rusty, like a well-loved but untuned instrument, but the muscle memory was still there, waiting to be reactivated. She even pulled up old news articles on her tablet, catching up on the economic and political landscapes of regions Reynolds Industries had once dominated. The next morning, at precisely 7 a.m., the insistent ring of her phone jolted her from a fitful sleep. It was Daniel again. His voice even more frantic than before, edged with a barely suppressed panic. "Mom, we have a situation," he blurted out, skipping any pleasantries. There's a potential investor coming in today, and Victoria is insisting you stay away from the office. Absolutely stay away. Eleanor's eyebrows furrowed. An investor? Who? Daniel took a shaky breath. Someone big, Mom. Really big. From the Middle East. His name is Ahmed Al-Hassan, and apparently, he's interested in acquiring Reynolds Industries entirely, not just a division. The whole company. The name Ahmed Al-Hassan immediately tugged at Eleanor's memory, a faint echo from a distant past, but she couldn't quite place the face or the context. It felt significant, yet frustratingly elusive. Al-Hassan, she repeated, trying to conjure the image. It's strange, Daniel continued, oblivious to his mother's internal struggle. He reached out directly to us. We haven't had any recent international projects, especially not in the Middle East. Victoria was completely blindsided, but she managed to secure a meeting. Eleanor knew exactly why Daniel found it strange. He had, under Victoria's subtle guidance and his own disinterest in the complexities of global commerce, allowed most of their valuable international relationships to lapse. He'd focused almost exclusively on domestic contracts, easier to manage, less demanding. But someone, somewhere, had been watching Reynolds Industries. Someone remembered. The meeting is at 2 p.m., Daniel explained, his voice hushed, as if Victoria might overhear. And Victoria has made it very, very clear that your presence would only cause complications. She wants everything to be perfectly streamlined. Eleanor understood. Victoria wanted her out of the way, a relic banished from the negotiation table, her perceived outdated information kept far from any influential ears. But understanding was one thing. Accepting it was entirely another. She finished her call with Daniel, assuring him vaguely that she would consider his advice. As soon as he hung up, Eleanor returned to Arthur's study, a fresh surge of determination coursing through her. The name Ahmed Al-Hassan was familiar. She was certain of it. She went straight to the section of the filing cabinet dedicated to Middle Eastern projects, meticulously sifting through the folders, her mind racing. Years blurred together, faces and names flickering in and out of her memory. Then she found it. In a folder simply marked Qatar Infrastructure Project, 2008, tucked amidst feasibility studies and signed agreements, was a single, slightly yellowed letter of introduction. It was from Sheikh Tariq Al-Hassan, a prominent Qatari dignitary and a longtime associate of Arthur's. The letter enthusiastically recommended his bright young nephew, Ahmed, a 24-year-old engineering student from MIT, for a summer internship with Reynolds Industries. A sudden vivid memory flooded Eleanor's mind. Ahmed. Of course. A serious, intelligent young man, fresh out of his junior year at MIT, eager to learn. He had spent 3 months working tirelessly alongside her and Arthur on a major water treatment facility project just outside Doha. She remembered his intense curiosity, his quick grasp of complex engineering problems, his respectful deference, and his quiet ambition. Arthur had been thoroughly impressed with the young intern. That boy has a good head on his shoulders, Eleanor, he had remarked to her one evening, watching Ahmed pore over blueprints late into the night. He'll go far. Mark my words. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, knowing smile. Arthur had been absolutely right. Ahmed Al-Hassan had indeed gone far. And now, he was here, knocking on the door of Reynolds Industries. The coincidence, if it was one, was too profound to ignore. At 1:30 p.m., Eleanor did something she hadn't done in months, perhaps years, since Arthur's passing. She went to her closet and pulled out a tailored navy suit, its fabric still crisp, a symbol of her professional past. She dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple silk blouse and, finally, Arthur's pearl necklace, a gift from their 25th anniversary. With a renewed sense of purpose and a burgeoning curiosity that felt like a long-lost friend, she got into her car and drove to the office. Nothing more, she told herself. Just curiosity. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to keep up with what happens next. Eleanor pulled into the Reynolds Industries parking lot, which was unusually full for a Tuesday afternoon. Her gaze immediately fell upon three sleek black SUVs, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon Sunday, unfamiliar figures in dark suits, clearly security personnel, loitered near the vehicles, their posture alert, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Ahmed Al-Hassan, it seemed, traveled with serious protection. A wry smile touched Eleanor's lips. Some things never changed in the world of high-stakes international business. She found a spot at the far end of the lot, her heels clicking a confident rhythm on the asphalt. A confidence she didn't entirely feel yet, but was determined to project. Her navy suit felt stiff but reassuring, and Arthur's pearls, cool against her skin, were a comforting anchor. As she walked towards the building, the familiar facade of Reynolds Industries, a place she had helped build brick by brick, filled her with a potent mix of nostalgia and resolve. Inside, Brenda, the longtime secretary whose hair was now streaked with silver just like Eleanor's, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening in surprise, then pleasure. "Mrs. Reynolds, I didn't expect to see you today." Eleanor offered a warm smile, a plausible excuse already forming on her lips. "Just remembered I needed to retrieve some old files from my office, Brenda. Nothing urgent, of course. Is the big meeting in the main conference room?" Brenda nodded, her eyes sparkling with a hint of gossip. "It is. That Mr. Al-Hassan is quite impressive, Mrs. Reynolds. Very polite, but you can tell he doesn't miss anything. Daniel and Victoria are in there now." She lowered her voice slightly. "Seems like a rather important discussion." Eleanor thanked her and turned towards the elevators, but at the last moment, she changed her mind. An old instinct, honed over decades of navigating corporate politics, kicked in. The second floor, she remembered, had a service corridor that ran directly behind the main conference room, a rarely used route for maintenance staff. It offered a discreet vantage point. She opted for the stairs, her muscles protesting slightly but her resolve firm. On the second floor, the corridor was dim and quiet. She located a maintenance closet, surprised to find it unlocked. Inside, a jumble of mops, buckets, and industrial-strength cleaning supplies filled the small space. Eleanor stepped in, feeling a faint blush creep up her neck. Sneaking around her own building, her own legacy, like a spy, felt utterly ridiculous, yet entirely necessary. She pressed her ear to the thin wall, straining to hear. Voices, muffled but distinct, filtered through. Victoria's voice, bright and professional, was immediately recognizable. "Impressive growth potential," she was saying, her tone oozing confidence. "Luxury residential developments are the future. Manufacturing, as you know, Mr. Al-Hassan, is simply outdated, a relic of a bygone era." Then, a new voice, deep and cultured, with a subtle melodic accent that Eleanor instantly recognized. "Ahmed, Reynolds Industries built some of the most innovative water treatment facilities in the Gulf region," he stated, his tone even, almost academic. "That hardly seems outdated, Miss Reynolds. In fact, sustainable infrastructure is more critical than ever." Victoria laughed, a light, dismissive sound that grated on Eleanor's nerves. "Well, yes, but that was years ago. We're focused on the future now, not living in the past." There was a beat of silence, then Daniel's apologetic, almost fawning voice. "My mother, Eleanor, was involved in those projects, of course. But she's retired now. Fully retired." Ahmed's voice, sharper now, cut through Daniel's sycophancy. "Retired? Or sidelined?" Victoria quickly jumped in, her voice hardening with defensiveness. "Retired, Mr. Al-Hassan. She's in her late 60s, you understand. Not really equipped for modern business practices. The world moves very fast these days." Eleanor gripped the handle of a mop so tightly her knuckles went white. Her age. Her capabilities. Dismissed. Again. The rage that had simmered since yesterday's boardroom exploded, a cold, searing fire in her gut. She, who had built the very foundations they were now trying to dismantle, was deemed obsolete. Ahmed's tone, when he spoke again, was noticeably cooler, more detached. Eleanor knew that tone. It was the tone of a shrewd negotiator whose interest was rapidly waning. Victoria, oblivious, forged ahead, eager to sell her vision. Eleanor heard her eagerly discussing the sale of the manufacturing division, painting it as a drain on resources and detailing plans for restructuring the 200 employees. A euphemism for mass layoffs. "Miss Reynolds," Ahmed finally said, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier politeness, "I would like to see the actual financial reports. Not just the projections, but the real numbers. And I would like to review them with someone who has a longer historical perspective of this company's operations, particularly its international ventures." Victoria's voice, usually so self-assured, was now tinged with defensiveness. "Mr. Al-Hassan, Daniel and I are perfectly capable of providing you with all necessary information. We see no need to disturb elderly family members who are no longer actively involved." Eleanor heard the subtle shift in Ahmed's tone then, a slight inflection, almost imperceptible. It was the polite, formal tone he used when a deal was dead, when he had no intention of pursuing it further, but wished to maintain decorum. "I understand completely, Miss Reynolds," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "In that case, I believe we have covered all essential points for today. I thank you for your time." Eleanor knew. The deal was off. Victoria, in her eagerness to dismiss the past, had just unwittingly sabotaged the very future she claimed to be building. Eleanor heard the unmistakable sound of chairs scraping across the polished boardroom floor, followed by a murmur of voices moving towards the door. The meeting was indeed over, and from what she'd overheard, it had gone precisely as poorly as she suspected. She waited a few more seconds, then cautiously slipped out of the maintenance closet, making her way quickly down the back stairs and out to the parking lot. She reached her car just as the large panoramic windows of the main conference room came into view. Through the glass, she could see figures moving inside. Victoria, animated and visibly agitated, was gesturing rapidly as she spoke to a defeated-looking Daniel. But Eleanor's gaze was drawn to a different figure. Ahmed Al-Hassan stood near the windows, his back mostly to the room, looking out towards the parking lot. He was no longer the eager, slightly awkward young intern she remembered, but a man in his full power, confident, impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair now showing distinguished silver streaks at the temples. He scanned the parking lot, his eyes sharp and discerning. For just a fleeting moment, his gaze seemed to settle directly on Eleanor's car, and she wondered if he was thinking, calculating, perhaps even remembering the woman who had guided him through his first engineering drafts all those years ago. It was an almost imperceptible pause, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope in Eleanor's chest. Then, his security detail approached him, speaking quietly. Ahmed gave a curt nod, turned away from the window, and disappeared from view. Minutes later, the 3 black SUVs, their engines purring, pulled out of the parking lot in a tight convoy. They accelerated smoothly onto the main road, taking Ahmed Al-Hassan away from Reynolds Industries, possibly forever. Eleanor sat in her car, watching the taillights disappear into the city traffic. A complex mixture of emotions churned within her. There was the heavy weight of lost opportunity, the bitterness of recognizing what Victoria's arrogance and short-sightedness had just chased away. But beneath that, a cold, hard resolve solidified. Her phone buzzed, vibrating insistently on the passenger seat. It was Daniel's text. "Meeting didn't go well. We need to talk." Eleanor didn't reply. Instead, she simply stared at the building that bore her family's name. The name Arthur, and she had poured their lives into. A decision, long overdue, hardened in her heart. I was going to stop being invisible, she murmured to herself. The words a vow. She barely slept that night. The image of Ahmed Al-Hassan, standing by the conference room window, his powerful yet familiar presence, replayed in her mind like a broken film reel. By morning, a new and audacious plan, one that would have seemed utterly impossible just days ago, had fully formed. She was going to find him. It took more effort than she anticipated. 3 phone calls, each one carefully worded to avoid raising suspicions. Then, a favor from an old contact at the Chamber of Commerce. A woman who still remembered Eleanor Reynolds and her formidable reputation. The information finally came through. Ahmed Al-Hassan was staying at the opulent Fairmont Hotel downtown, and his private jet was scheduled to depart for Dubai the following morning. She had less than 24 hours. At precisely 10 a.m., Eleanor dialed the Fairmont. She asked to be connected to Ahmed Al-Hassan's suite. The phone rang twice before a carefully neutral, professional voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Al-Hassan," Eleanor began, her voice steady and clear, carrying the weight of decades of authority. "This is Eleanor Reynolds from Reynolds Industries. I understand you had a meeting with my son Daniel and his wife Victoria yesterday." There was a beat of silence on the other end, a pause heavy with surprise. "Mrs. Reynolds," Ahmed's voice finally replied, still carefully neutral, but with an underlying hint of curiosity. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I imagine you weren't expecting a lot of things about yesterday's meeting, Mr. Al-Hassan," Eleanor countered, her tone infused with a hint of dry wit. "I'd like to apologize for some of what transpired. And, if you have a few minutes before your departure, I would very much like to request a few minutes of your time, privately, to discuss it." Another long pause stretched across the line, during which Eleanor held her breath, every nerve ending taut. She could almost feel Ahmed weighing his options, assessing the unexpected gambit. Finally, his voice returned, a little less formal, a hint of his old self emerging. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "I have an opening for lunch. The hotel restaurant, at 1 p.m. today. Would that suit you?" Eleanor let out a silent sigh of relief. "Perfectly, Mr. Al-Hassan," she replied, a genuine smile touching her lips. "I look forward to it." Eleanor arrived at the Fairmont's elegant hotel restaurant precisely 5 minutes early, a habit Arthur had instilled in her. Her navy suit, the same one from yesterday, felt less like a costume and more like a second skin now. She had exchanged Arthur's pearls for his sapphire earrings, the deep blue stones a subtle reminder of the power and clarity she felt whenever she wore them. Across the room, nestled in a quiet corner booth, Ahmed Al-Hassan was already seated, a formidable figure even in repose, intently focused on a stack of financial reports. He looked up as she approached, and a flicker of recognition, then surprise, crossed his face. He rose fluidly, extending a hand in greeting. The gesture was refined, courteous. Standing before her, he was even more striking than he had appeared from a distance. The eager young man she had known had matured into a powerful businessman, his presence commanding, his silvered temples adding an air of gravitas. He was clearly a man who now effortlessly commanded rooms full of influential people. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his voice deep and warm, a hint of genuine appreciation in his tone. "Thank you for reaching out." Eleanor took his hand, her grip firm and confident. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Mr. Al-Hassan." She met his gaze directly. "And please, call me Eleanor." He nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Eleanor it is." He gestured for her to sit, and they settled into the booth. "You've done well for yourself, Ahmed," Eleanor said, a genuine warmth in her voice. "Arthur always said you'd go far. He saw the spark in you even back then." Ahmed's expression softened, a genuine, almost nostalgic look. "He was a brilliant engineer, Eleanor. Truly a visionary. Please accept my deepest condolences for your loss. I learned more in those 3 months with Reynolds Industries, working alongside you both, than I did in 2 years of graduate coursework." His words carried a profound sincerity. Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering her courage for the frank conversation ahead. "I have to ask, Ahmed," she began, leaning forward slightly. "Is that why you came? Because of your connection to our company, to Arthur, to the legacy?" Ahmed paused, considering her question. Then, the first truly genuine smile she'd seen from him since his arrival blossomed on his face, transforming his severe features. "Partly, Eleanor. Definitely partly. I've been following Reynolds Industries for years, even after my internship. I saw the quality of your work, the integrity. When I heard Arthur had passed, and then that the company was struggling, that it was losing its way, I thought perhaps there might be an opportunity for mutual benefit, to revitalize what I always admired." He paused, his smile fading, replaced by a more serious expression. "But after yesterday's meeting, I'm concerned. Concerned that Reynolds Industries may no longer be the company I thought it was." Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly, her own resolve hardening. "What if I told you, Ahmed, that it could be again? Exactly the company you thought it was, and more." Ahmed raised an eyebrow, a flicker of professional skepticism in his eyes. "With all due respect, Eleanor, what authority do you have to make such a claim? From what I understood yesterday, you are no longer actively involved." "None," Eleanor confessed, her voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its conviction. "Officially, I have no authority at all. I'm just a retired widow, remember?" She allowed a touch of dry humor to color her tone, referencing Victoria's dismissal. "But unofficially, Ahmed, I'm the person who built most of the relationships you're probably thinking about. The person who negotiated the contracts. The person who saw those projects through. The person who ensured our word was our bond," she continued, her words painting a vivid picture of her past. "I learned Arabic, not out of academic curiosity, but because I believed in building real, deep relationships with our partners. I spent months living in Jordan, then Qatar, then the UAE, understanding the nuances of local culture, the intricacies of the legal systems, the rhythm of daily life. It was that dedication, that commitment, that built the reputation that brought you to our door, Ahmed." Ahmed listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Victoria Reynolds seemed to dismiss that experience yesterday," he observed, his voice neutral. Eleanor allowed herself a small, mirthless smile. "Victoria has an MBA from Wharton and 3 years of experience at Reynolds Industries. I have 25 years of hands-on international construction and infrastructure development experience built from the ground up in the very markets you are interested in. Which do you think," she challenged him gently, "is more relevant to what you're considering?" Just then, a waiter approached their table to take their order. Ahmed, without missing a beat, ordered his meal in fluent, flawless Arabic, his words rich and resonant. He then turned to Eleanor, offering a polite apology. "Forgive me, Eleanor, a habit developed over years. I forgot you might not understand." He then switched to English, addressing the waiter. Eleanor watched him, a slow smile spreading across her face. When the waiter left, she turned back to Ahmed, her eyes twinkling. To his utter surprise, she replied, in equally fluent Arabic, "No need to apologize, Ahmed. I learned it out of necessity, not just habit, to build real relationships." As I said, Ahmed's expression transformed dramatically. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in a way that suggested deep thought, not suspicion. A genuine curiosity, almost excitement, began to replace his earlier caution. He leaned forward, engaging her in rapid Arabic, testing her comprehension, asking about specific technical aspects of past projects, challenging her on regulatory frameworks. Eleanor answered every question, fluently, confidently. her mind effortlessly recalling details she thought long forgotten. He listened, utterly captivated, a genuine look of admiration growing on his face. When she finished explaining a particularly complex logistical challenge they had overcome in Doha, he simply said, in English, "Your pronunciation is still excellent, Eleanor." "Victoria," Ahmed observed, his voice calm but perceptive, "seems to consider historical relationships and institutional knowledge irrelevant to modern business. She spoke of them yesterday as liabilities, not assets." Eleanor nodded, a somber expression on her face. "She sees the company as a collection of assets to be optimized. Ahmed, purely transactional. What she doesn't understand is that relationships are assets. Some of the most valuable ones can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. But they are the bedrock of trust and long-term success, especially in the markets you and I know so well." She then reminded him of his own internship with Reynolds Industries. "Arthur and I didn't just see you as cheap labor, Ahmed. We saw a future leader, a young man with immense potential. We invested in you, not just with knowledge, but with trust. And that, I believe, forged a lasting memory, didn't it?" Ahmed's warm smile confirmed her words, a genuine warmth returning to his eyes. "Indeed, Eleanor. He remembers the woman who taught him to read complex soil composition reports and translate them into practical engineering solutions, and the man who trusted him with sensitive documents, treating him as a colleague long before he had earned the title." Their conversation flowed effortlessly from there. They delved into the specifics of the manufacturing division. Eleanor eloquently explained its history, its strategic value in providing consistent quality and supply chain control, and the deep, specialized expertise of its 200 long-term employees. She acknowledged its lower profit margins compared to some high-growth ventures, but stressed its stability and foundational importance to the company's overall strength. Ahmed listened intently, occasionally interjecting with sharp technical questions about specific manufacturing processes or supply chain logistics, questions that Victoria would never have even thought to ask. "In my experience," he remarked thoughtfully at one point, "companies that treat their employees as disposable usually end up being disposable themselves. Loyalty, true loyalty, is a rare commodity." As they spoke, Eleanor felt a dormant part of her reawaken fully. This was what she thrived on. Complex problem-solving, strategic thinking, the joy of intellectual sparring with someone who understood both the technical and human aspects of business. It was exhilarating, a stark contrast to the stifling silence and passive despair of the past 2 years. After nearly an hour of detailed discussion, Ahmed leaned back, a speculative gleam in his eyes. "Eleanor," he began, his voice taking on a more formal, decisive tone, "I have a proposal. It's an ambitious one. But it would require your active involvement, not just consultation." Eleanor's heart, which she thought had long since settled into a quiet rhythm, began to race. "What kind of proposal, Ahmed?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. "A joint venture," he stated, his gaze direct and unwavering. He outlined a 5-year partnership, an approximate $200 million investment spread across multiple infrastructure projects in Kuwait, Oman, and Jordan. Reynolds Industries, with its foundational expertise in water treatment and infrastructure development, has exactly the capabilities we need to execute these projects. The manufacturing division, far from being outdated, is crucial to our ability to deliver quality and control costs. He paused, then delivered the crucial condition. "I am offering to work with Reynolds Industries, but only if Eleanor Reynolds is the project manager. Not Daniel, not Victoria. You, Eleanor. That is non-negotiable." The physical shock of his words hit Eleanor like a blow. Project manager. The role she had excelled at, the role that had defined so much of her career, the role she had lovingly abdicated 2 years ago. "I haven't managed a project in 2 years, Ahmed," she said, almost involuntarily, but then quickly corrected herself, a fierce resolve burning in her eyes. But yes, I remember. I remember everything. Ahmed's expression remained steadfast. He reiterated the terms. A 5-year partnership, approximately $200 million. Your company handles the design, engineering, and construction, utilizing your manufacturing division. Mine handles the financing, local coordination, and government relations. A 50-50 split on all profits. He then added, his voice brooking no argument, and I deal directly with you, Eleanor. No intermediaries. No delegation. Our communication lines will be open and direct. Eleanor knew this was an extraordinary offer, a lifeline thrown just as Reynolds Industries was sinking. She needed to discuss it with Daniel, officially, even if her decision was already made. As they rose from the table, Ahmed's final words resonated with a quiet power. Yesterday, your daughter-in-law told me that the previous generation was no longer relevant to Reynolds Industries. Today, Eleanor, you've shown me that the previous generation might be the only thing that can save it. Shaking hands outside the restaurant, Eleanor felt a profound sense of transformation. In just 2 hours, she had gone from being an invisible, forgotten widow to being the indisputable linchpin of the biggest, most significant deal in her company's history. The weight of it, the responsibility, was immense, but so was the exhilaration. She walked into the elegant lobby of the Fairmont, pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. She dialed Daniel's number. Daniel, she said, her voice clear and strong. I need you and Victoria to meet me here at the Fairmont. In an hour. We have a lot to discuss. Mom? Where are you? Daniel's voice, strained and laced with agitation, answered her call. Victoria's been looking for you. She heard you might have contacted that investor. The accusation hung in the air, a mix of fear and indignation. Eleanor cut him off, her voice firm and devoid of the usual maternal softness. Conference room B on the mezzanine level. In 1 hour. Don't be late. She didn't wait for a reply. Simply hung up. Exactly 1 hour later, Daniel and Victoria walked into conference room. Victoria's face was a mask of barely controlled fury, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to bristle with indignation. Before Eleanor could utter a single word, Victoria launched her attack. What exactly do you think you're doing, Eleanor? Undermining Daniel, going behind our backs with a potential investor? This is utterly unprofessional. Eleanor, seated at the head of the polished conference table, simply raised a hand, a gesture that immediately commanded attention. Her eyes, cool and unwavering, fixed on Victoria. Sit down, she said, her voice low, but carrying an authority she hadn't consciously wielded in 2 years. It was the voice of a woman accustomed to being obeyed, to making decisions, to leading. To both Daniel and Victoria's surprise, they complied, sinking into the chairs opposite her, albeit with varying degrees of resentment. Without another word, Eleanor slid a document across the table, pushing it gently towards them. It was the letter of intent, formally drafted and bearing the distinctive logo of Al Hassan International. This, she announced, her voice calm and clear, is a letter of intent from Al Hassan International. They're offering Reynolds Industries a 5-year partnership worth approximately $200 million for infrastructure projects in the Middle East. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief, then scanned the document rapidly. Victoria's face cycled through a series of rapid expressions. Confusion, then stark disbelief, followed by a dawning panic. This can't be real, she sputtered, her voice high-pitched with indignation. He walked out of our meeting yesterday. He had absolutely no interest. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze piercing. He walked out of your meeting, Victoria, because you insulted him. You dismissed 25 years of painstakingly built international relationships and institutional knowledge as outdated. You dismissed me, the woman who cultivated those relationships, as an elderly family member not equipped for modern business. And you presented a fantasy of luxury real estate developments while ignoring the company's core strengths and its bleeding balance sheet. As she spoke, Eleanor began to spread various documents across the table. Letters of recommendation from various government officials in the Gulf region, some dating back a decade, old contract renewals, some spanning multiple pages of intricate Arabic script, invitations to bid on monumental projects, all addressed directly to Arthur or Eleanor Reynolds. "This," she said, gesturing to the spread, "is my outdated institutional knowledge. These are the relationships you dismissed. This is the trust your husband and I built." Daniel stared at the Arabic script, his jaw slack. "Mom, you speak Arabic?" "Among other languages," Eleanor replied, a dry edge to her tone. "Arabic? Mandarin. Enough Portuguese to get by. Languages learned out of necessity, not for social graces. They opened doors, Daniel. They allowed us to build relationships that Victoria's MBA from Wharton, impressive as it is, has no understanding of. Business in those regions is built on trust, on personal connections, on a shared history, not on glossy projections and abstract financial models." Then, with a methodical precision, Eleanor laid out her own financial analysis. She meticulously debunked Victoria's claims about the manufacturing division, proving with hard numbers that it was not only stable but consistently profitable, a vital component of their operations, far from being a drain on resources. She contrasted this with Victoria's luxury development plan, highlighting its immense risks, its speculative nature, and its lack of any solid, pre-secured funding. The cold, hard facts laid bare how thoroughly Daniel had been misled. She then turned her gaze to her son. "Daniel, in the 2 years you've been at the helm, how many new international contracts have we secured? How many of these relationships have you actively nurtured?" "None, because you allowed yourself to be convinced that what your father and I built, the trust and reputation that took decades, was simply old-fashioned. International construction, Daniel, doesn't run on spreadsheets alone. It runs on relationships. On trust." Finally, she pulled out a faded photograph, placing it in the center of the table. It was the picture of a younger Ahmed Al-Hassan, Arthur, and herself at a groundbreaking ceremony in Qatar. "This," Eleanor explained softly, her voice carrying a profound weight, "this is what brought him here, Daniel. Not Victoria's fancy projections, not your inherited title. It was the memory of working alongside people who saw potential in a 24-year-old engineering student. It was respect, loyalty. And you two nearly drove it away." Daniel stared at the photo, a look of profound realization dawning on his face. "I never knew any of this, Mom," he whispered, a hint of shame in his voice. Eleanor then delivered the ultimatum, her gaze sweeping between them, firm and unwavering. "Ahmed Al-Hassan's offer comes with one non-negotiable condition. I personally manage these projects. I return to Reynolds Industries as the senior project manager, with full authority over the international division and direct reporting to the board." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "So, you have a choice. Bring me back. Allow me to save the company my husband and I built. Or, Reynolds Industries will be out of business within 2 years, without new contracts, without the manufacturing division, and with Victoria's risky ventures, you simply won't survive." She gave them a deadline. "The offer from Al-Hassan International expires at midnight tomorrow. You need to make a decision." Daniel looked utterly overwhelmed, his eyes pleading. "Mom, I don't know how to do this," he confessed, the bravado completely gone. "I never wanted to run the company. It was always Dad's passion. My passion is art, not engineering." Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy, but her resolve held. "Then perhaps it's time to admit that, Daniel. But don't let our family's legacy, the work of decades, simply crumble because you are unwilling to use the knowledge and experience that is right here, available to you." She rose from the table, gathering her documents. "The choice is yours. I'll await your decision." She left them sitting there, two figures at a crossroads, with the future of Reynolds Industries hanging precariously in the balance. After Eleanor left conference room B, the silence that enveloped Daniel and Victoria was heavy, pregnant with the future of Reynolds Industries. Victoria, initially furious, had descended into a simmering rage, pacing the room like a caged animal, her voice sharp and accusatory. "This is preposterous, Daniel. Your mother is manipulating you. She's a relic, out of touch. Her connections are ancient history. That Arab investor was clearly just humoring her." Daniel, however, sat slumped in his chair, the defiance drained from him. The photo of his mother, his father, and a young Ahmed at the groundbreaking ceremony lay untouched on the table, a stark reminder of a legacy he had only superficially understood. He saw now, with dawning clarity, how far he had drifted, how much he hadn't known, and how precariously close he'd brought the company to ruin under Victoria's influence. She laid out the numbers. "Victoria," he said, his voice quiet, "she proved the manufacturing division is profitable. She showed me the actual risks of your luxury developments. She knows these markets, these people, in a way neither of us ever will." His despair was palpable, battling against Victoria's unyielding ambition. As the midnight deadline loomed, Daniel made his decision. Just before 11, his phone vibrated in Eleanor's quiet living room. "Mom," he said, his voice weary but resolute, "I've overridden Victoria. We accept. We need you back." There was no fanfare, no grand apology, just a raw acknowledgement of defeat and a plea for salvation. Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a surge of familiar, exhilarating purpose. She immediately called Ahmed al-Hassan. His voice, when he answered, was calm and measured. "I had a feeling you would, Eleanor," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. "Welcome back. Let's make this happen." They quickly discussed the immediate next steps, a preliminary outline for the joint venture, setting up formal contracts to be signed within the week. The following morning, Eleanor walked into the Reynolds Industries lobby, a place she hadn't entered as an active employee in 2 years. Brenda, the longtime secretary, looked up, her expression morphing from surprise to a radiant smile. "Mrs. Reynolds," she exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. It's wonderful to have you back." Brenda's genuine warmth was a balm, a quiet affirmation that she belonged here. Victoria was not so welcoming. She met Eleanor outside Daniel's office, her face taut with barely concealed fury. "This is a farce, Eleanor," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You're humiliating Daniel, and you're making a fool of yourself. This company needs fresh blood, not outdated management." Eleanor merely offered a small, knowing smile. "Victoria," she said, her voice calm and firm, "the board has approved my return as senior project manager, with full authority over international operations. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the new organizational chart." "Or," she added, her gaze unwavering, "perhaps you'd prefer to focus on those luxury real estate ventures on your own time." Victoria, realizing her power had evaporated, could only glare, her defeat absolute. She retreated, defeated, though Eleanor knew this wouldn't be the last she heard from her. Daniel, meanwhile, had found a new, quiet resolve. He approached Eleanor later that day, looking less burdened, almost relieved. "Mom," he began, I've decided to step back from direct management. I'll focus on the domestic contracts for now, and handle some of the administrative oversight, but I'll defer to your judgment on all international matters. And I want to get more involved in the charitable foundation Dad started. It's where my heart is." It was an admission of his true strengths and his limitations. A maturation Eleanor had longed to see. Eleanor reclaimed her old office, the scent of Arthur's pipe tobacco still faintly lingering in the air. The desk, cleared of 2 years of dust, felt familiar beneath her hands. The weight of her return, the responsibility of the $200 million deal, was immense, but so was the joy. She was home. Her first official acts were swift and decisive. She immediately called a meeting with the manufacturing division heads, assuring them of their jobs and the company's renewed commitment to their work. The relief in their faces, the quiet expressions of loyalty, were more rewarding than any financial bonus. She then dove into the current financial reports, a dizzying array of spreadsheets that Daniel and Victoria had struggled to interpret. With her experienced eye, she quickly identified inefficiencies and potential areas for immediate improvement. Victoria did attempt to obstruct minor details regarding previous expenditures, internal memos that accidentally went missing. But Eleanor, decades of experience in navigating corporate politics under her belt, easily thwarted each attempt, her quiet competence a far more potent weapon than Victoria's bluster. Each small victory solidified her authority, reminding everyone, including herself, of her capabilities. Then, Eleanor began reactivating her old networks. Phone calls to Sheikh Tariq al-Hassan, whose nephew had just given the company a new lease on life. Emails to former associates in Shanghai, in Brazil, in Germany. The responses were immediate, overwhelmingly positive. "Eleanor Reynolds!" they exclaimed, genuinely surprised and pleased. "We heard you had retired. So glad to know you're back." The very relationships Victoria had dismissed as outdated were now the vibrant, living conduits that would rebuild Reynolds Industries. A deep sense of coming full circle settled over Eleanor. She was no longer the invisible widow, adrift in a house of memories. She was the company's savior, the architect of its future, her energy and passion fully restored. The company, under her renewed leadership, began to hum with a purpose it hadn't known since Arthur's passing. New life flowed through its veins, a direct result of her unwavering resolve. With the joint venture on solid ground and initial project planning underway, Eleanor looked towards the horizon. The challenges were immense, but so was the opportunity. She was ready. Months turned into a year, then two, since Eleanor Reynolds had walked back into Reynolds Industries, not as an invisible widow, but as its undeniable architect and savior. The initial challenges of reviving a company teetering on the brink were immense, but Eleanor tackled them with the same fierce intelligence and unwavering resolve that had defined her career alongside Arthur. The joint venture with Al Hassan International quickly became the cornerstone of Reynolds Industries' resurgence. The first project, a large-scale water purification plant in a burgeoning industrial zone in Kuwait, was launched with meticulous planning and flawless execution. Eleanor at the helm was everywhere, reviewing blueprints, negotiating with local contractors in fluent Arabic, overseeing logistics, and personally ensuring every detail met the exacting standards that had once been the company's hallmark. Ahmed Al-Hassan proved to be an exceptional partner, his trust in Eleanor absolute, his respect unwavering. Their direct communication, free from intermediaries and corporate politicking, streamlined decision-making, and fostered an incredibly efficient working relationship. Under Eleanor's renewed leadership, Reynolds Industries didn't just stabilize, it thrived. New contracts, both domestic and international, began to flow in, attracted by the revitalized reputation and, perhaps more significantly, by the undeniable presence of Eleanor Reynolds herself. The financial reports, once a source of dread, now showed a steady upward trajectory. The bleeding had stopped, and growth, sustainable and strategic, had begun. The manufacturing division, which Victoria had so carelessly dismissed, became a vital artery of the company once more. Eleanor personally invested in modernizing its equipment, retraining its workforce, and expanding its capabilities. The 200 employees, whose jobs had hung precariously in the balance, now worked with renewed vigor and profound loyalty, grateful for a leader who saw their value beyond mere numbers. The hum of machinery on the factory floor was no longer just the sound of production. It was the sound of purpose, of security, of a legacy being honored. Daniel, true to his word, had fully stepped back from direct operational management. He found his true calling in spearheading the Reynolds Charitable Foundation, focusing on sustainable development and arts education initiatives in underserved communities. Freed from the burden of a role he never wanted, he blossomed, his natural empathy and artistic sensibility finding a productive outlet. He frequently sought his mother's advice, not on corporate strategy, but on ethical leadership and long-term vision. Their relationship, once strained by his youthful ambition and her quiet withdrawal, had matured into one of mutual respect and genuine affection. Victoria's influence at Reynolds Industries, stripped of Daniel's support and rendered irrelevant by Eleanor's undeniable success, rapidly waned. She made a few more attempts to introduce her innovative but highly speculative real estate ventures, but these were politely yet firmly rebuffed by a reinvigorated board of directors, now fully confident in Eleanor's direction. Eventually, with a quiet but definitive finality, Victoria left Reynolds Industries. She announced her departure to pursue independent entrepreneurial opportunities in luxury real estate, a move that surprised no one and caused little ripple in the now calm waters of the company. Her exit marked the true end of the crisis. Eleanor tirelessly worked to re-establish Reynolds Industries' ethical standing, a cornerstone of Arthur's philosophy. Fair wages, employee welfare, community engagement. These were not mere buzzwords but deeply ingrained principles. The company's reputation, once tarnished by uncertainty and the ruthless pursuit of short-term gains, now shone brighter than ever, a beacon of integrity in the industry. Walking through the offices, Eleanor was often met with warm smiles and quiet nods of appreciation from employees who remembered her from years past. "It feels like the old days," Mrs. Reynolds, Brenda, the loyal secretary, once remarked, her eyes twinkling. Except, even better. It was a sentiment echoed throughout the company, a testament to Eleanor's unwavering commitment. In the quiet evenings, sometimes in Arthur's study, sometimes simply staring out at her meticulously retended rose garden, Eleanor would reflect. Arthur's legacy, once threatened, was not only secured but thriving, revitalized by the very hands that had helped build it. She felt his presence, not as a source of grief, but as a guiding light, a silent partner in her renewed endeavors. Her personal life, too, had found a new rhythm. The isolation of widowhood had given way to a vibrant schedule filled with meetings, travel, and the stimulating intellectual engagement she had craved. She still enjoyed quiet moments, reading by the fireplace or tending her garden, but they were now interludes of peace, not escapes from a hollow existence. She was no longer defined by loss, but by purpose. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor stood on the construction site of the latest joint venture project, a massive bridge connecting two bustling cities in Oman. The desert wind whipped her silver hair around her face, but she stood firm, watching the cranes arc against the azure sky, the controlled chaos of hundreds of workers moving with precision. She wore a hard hat and safety vest over her tailored suit. Her eyes, clear and sharp, missing nothing. Ahmed Al-Hassan joined her, a respectful distance away. "Another success, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "This bridge will stand for 100 years, a testament to your vision." Eleanor smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached her eyes. "A testament to collaboration, Ahmed," she corrected softly. "And to building things that last." She looked out at the sprawling construction, then back at the horizon, a boundless expanse mirroring the possibilities she now saw for her company, for her family, and for herself. She was not just a survivor, she was a thriving, powerful matriarch, proving that experience, integrity, and a fierce spirit were never truly outdated.